Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, here to take you through Friday's action, a very busy Friday around the SEC, what with all the doubleheaders we had going on. So a lot to get to from Friday. We'll take a peek ahead at today's action, which should be fantastic as well. Before we get to anything specific, though, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is your new home for Jordan Brand. Gear up today and take flight. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan gear for the entire family, available in-store and at academy.com. Unleash your greatness with Jordan Brand, now at Academy. All right, a busy day, a late day, as it turned out, around the SEC. Really a long day when you consider how early some of the doubleheaders got started relatively early relative to what we're, normally starting Fridays on. And then a late finish, obviously, with Arkansas and LSU. Going to have two games of the day today on the show. One of them is obviously that LSU-Arkansas game. We'll get to that shortly, but promise made, promise kept, that if it happened, when and if it happened, it would lead the show. Missouri 9, Texas A&M 6. Missouri has won a game in SEC play. Congrats to the Tigers. Jokes aside, it can't have been fun. Their existence going 0-24 in the league could not have been fun. Heartbreaking at times. They had some close calls, especially last weekend. Couldn't get it done. They do get it done here. The most shocking part about it for me is a 6-run ninth inning for Mizzou. And yes, A&M, there were some free passes and an error, but like Mizzou also hit their way into that. Like they also did some things offensively. So it wasn't just that A&M coughed up the game. A&M helped them for sure, but Mizzou took advantage. 6-run ninth inning from down 6-3 in that one. Good work from the bullpen for Missouri. Brady Kalen Brink didn't get deep in the game, but the Missouri bullpen took over and did an excellent job finishing it. We'll talk about that when we start talking about our pitcher of the day candidates, things like that. But really, really strong work there. In the big picture here, A&M's math got tougher last night. They're now 10-15 in the SEC. And while I would expect them to win the last two games in this series, I also expected them to win last night. So, and it's clear Missouri is playing better. Last weekend against Georgia, I wondered on yesterday's episode, how real is the way Missouri's playing as playing better? Or did Georgia just play poorly last weekend in Columbia? Could have been either and could still be either. And the answer is probably a little bit of both. But Missouri clearly playing better. Again, I still think A&M wins the last two games of the series, but Missouri did it once means they could do it twice, right? And so, but even if A&M does win the last two games of the series, that's only 12 SEC wins. They'd still need to get at least one at Foley Field to finish the regular season next weekend. And obviously, we know that's an extremely tough place to play. And I would also like A&M's chances to get a game there, but like I said, the math just got way harder for the Aggies because I think we were all kind of mentally penciling in, maybe not in pen, but we were penciling in a sweep here for A&M. The big issue last night for A&M, they had 7 hits. 6 of them came from the top 3 hitters in the lineup. And so there just wasn't anything happening in the middle and bottom half or middle and bottom third of the A&M lineup. And that's just tough when you've got that many outs just stacked up on top of each other. And there's only a handful of guys making things happen in the lineup. So kudos to Mizzou, first win in the SEC. Perhaps this loosens them up a little bit down the stretch, and maybe they play a little freer, play a little better. we shall see. But a tough loss on the A&M side. All right, I'm gonna pull this away, so my face is about to get really big as I pull up the next box score here. And that is, of course, LSU 5, Arkansas 4. That was in 10 innings. This was the true game of the day, had I not promised to lead the show with Missouri when they win a game in the league. Obviously, the rain delay was the big story early on here. Didn't start until, I think it was almost 11 o'clock. Almost 11 o'clock local time, I think is right. Maybe, but regardless, like just very late start. kind of saw that coming. I know LSU fans in the comments yesterday were a little bit worried about it, and their worries were well founded. I know both teams were eager to get the game in yesterday, because let's not forget that it is a quick turnaround week where all the series next weekend start on Thursday. So they didn't want to have to back their aces up another day. It's already going to be a short week for those Friday guys. They will be Thursday guys next week. I guess not everyone will play it that way, but it is going to be a shorter week. So you had to adjust something in your rotation. So to avoid making that a little more complicated still, that they really wanted to play it out. So they were patient. They waited. They got it in. Ethan Fry walk-off sack fly for LSU gets the win there. Close play at the plate. Really, really good throw to home from Justin Thomas Jr. in center field for Arkansas. It made that play a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, frankly. Thomas was coming in a little bit, but he was more coming over. So he kind of had to throw kind of back across his body to make the throw to the plate. And I thought there was I didn't think there was really any chance it was going to be a close play, and it really kind of was. So kudos to all sides there, but just a gritty win for LSU. Kind of a back and forth game. LSU lands some of the first punches. Arkansas fights back, but LSU gets kind of the last laugh with the 2 runs in the 7th to tie it and the run in the 10th to take the lead. A couple good starting pitching performances. Zach Root, Kate Anderson were both good, not great, but given the quality of the opponent each was facing, those starts are obviously better than I think even the numbers, because it was just tough in tough conditions, right? I mean, goodness gracious, think about it this way, just in your day-to-day life. Right now it's a little after 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central. Imagine you having to wait 13 more hours, and then you need to be at your peak performance. Right? You need to be in your whatever the peak preparation and readiness is. You have to be ready for that. And they didn't know the game was going to be delayed, so it's not like those guys could have just taken a 2-hour nap in the afternoon to try to reset their bodies a little bit. They were at the ballpark as if the game was going to be played mostly on time, or at least they were ready for that. And so it's a lot of sitting around and waiting, and to still be pretty sharp come that time of night is impressive stuff from those young men. So fun game. I imagine the rest of the series is going to be fun as well. Kudos to the LSU faithful. Not a surprise, but still impressive that the number of people stuck around late into the night for that game. Impressive stuff there for the LSU faithful. Again, not a surprise, but want to call it out either way. All right, got a lot of comments waiting, so let's get to some of those. I see your comment, Will Stafford, 9:55 local. Thank you. I couldn't remember if it was, I live in Eastern time, so I couldn't remember if it was almost 11 o'clock my time, which it was, or local time. And so thank you for that clarification there. Will Stafford says, walk-off sack fly last night was the exact same time as Jared Jones' walk-off homer against Tennessee, 1:17 a.m. Wow, that's kind of a funny coincidence. I mean, maybe LSU should just start all of their games at 10 o'clock. I mean, have we thought about that? Something to consider. I'll call Jay Johnson later and we'll talk about it. Jeremy Scott says, roll Tide. Hopefully they get games in. I as well hope that. Georgia and Bama were going to play a doubleheader yesterday. Didn't quite get through the second game. Suspended in the 5th inning with Bama up 6-2 to try to even that series. So hopefully weather cooperates to get things in. I think it's just going to be a pack your patience weekend, although the other doubleheaders got in yesterday, so that made it a little bit easier. All right. Daniel Ordoin says, good morning, Joe. Good morning to you, Daniel. Great game in the box this morning. That's funny. Can't wait to see what we get from Anthony Ianson today. Hopefully put the stake in the national seed convo. Yeah, I mean, I think that would, of course, nothing is guaranteed. Y'all know that. But I think that would more or less lock it up for LSU. I mean, let me pull up the RPI page so I just have it for all of the discussions today. I think that would be, they'd have a really strong case, obviously. That'd be a 17th SEC win with still 3 games to go. And you'd like the RPI to be a little bit higher. But, not all you can do is win your games, right? But it's going to be a compelling case because LSU is going to compare favorably probably to a team like Vanderbilt that right now they're 2 games better than, in the standings, maybe even Auburn, because they have the same number of wins as Auburn right now, but Auburn's series is over. So, I like Auburn as a host, but are they a top 8? We'll have to see. But I think LSU's resume will compare, of course, other than the head-to-head, but the head-to-head only matters so much, right? It's just 3 games. So, like, it looms large in our minds because we remember it that way, and we're comparing 2 teams. That's where our mind goes. But from a committee standpoint, it might be a factor, but it's really just considered 3 games. So there's that. Anyway, my point is, even with an RPI that's like 7, 8, something like that, I do think LSU is going to compare favorably in a lot of their metrics to some other teams that are going to be in that same kind of range. Like an Oregon State, for example, right? They're sitting 6 in RPI, but Oregon State's resume just doesn't stack up to where LSU's is. Okay. Jacob Carlson dropping in a go Noles. Fair enough. They are another team that's, Florida State also kind of in that national seed bubble, kind of. Obviously, this isn't an ACC podcast, so I can't break it down as much, but certainly another team that's kind of in that national seed fringy area. Sean Miller says, "I'm here to take my whooping since I made fun of the Longhorns for disappearing when their losing streak began." That's big of you, Sean. It takes a big man to admit, when he was a little overzealous. So good on you. Good on you, Sean. Mark says, early on the hot seat. I don't know if that's a statement or a question, Mark. I think their comeback has maybe comeback throughout the season has maybe given early a little more, has maybe thrown some cold water on the hot seat, but certainly even if they do end up in the postseason, and I think they'll still find a way to squeak in. That's my thought, but it certainly isn't what we expected from this team, right? And so I do think there is a important conversations to be had in the offseason, to how to kind of rebuild the roster, because they are going to be losing some key pieces. But I do think there will be some discussion in the offseason of how do we put this roster back together and make 2026 more in line with what we're looking for here at A&M. Dave said, "Morning, Joe." Good morning, Dave. Hoping the weather holds out. Me too. I'm with you on that. Talk about a night for Evan Sierry. My goodness. Yeah, Evan Sierry, 15 strikeouts in 8 innings. I heard on the broadcast, I was driving back. I was doing an ESPN Plus game at East Carolina last night, but on the drive back, I was listening to that game, and I heard the fact that, or the little nugget that it's the first 15 strikeout performance since Will Bednar in the 2021 College World Series against Texas. Obviously, that was a pretty magical run for Mississippi State. Don't have to remind you all of that, but and kind of out of nowhere, because Evan Sierry's not a big strikeout guy. I think his season high before this was 6, something like that. So almost 3 times as many strikeouts. It was just a good matchup. Ole Miss is kind of a big swinging team. Like, they take big old hacks, and if you're missing bats and you're on your game, especially with your off-speed stuff, I think you can have success, and we saw that. So now if you just said, hey, Evan Sierry has a good start, I'd have been like, okay, maybe it's 6 innings and he gives up a couple runs and strikes out 7 or 8 or something like that. But it was dominant. Like, it was truly a dominant outing for Evan Sierry, which is not, I don't think he's had an outing in his career to this point that could be called dominant. Certainly not on that level. So really, really impressive stuff for Sierry. And if he's not going to be that every week, obviously, right? But he just showed kind of a ceiling there that we haven't seen from him. That makes Mississippi State that much more dangerous. Just understanding that he's got that in there, right, moving forward. So, yeah, heck of a day for Evan Sierry. Sean Miller says, Mizzou had 7 infield hits, and the A&M bullpen continues to flummox. I was not aware Mizzou had that many infield hits, which, there's some of that's just kind of dumb luck, right? You hit a dribbler in the right spot. That's hard to defend. But the flip side of it is that that's the way Mizzou, maybe not with the infield hits, but Mizzou is built to run. They have a bunch of team speed. That's what they value. And as we've talked about kind of ad nauseum, like, A&M's gotten better defensively throughout the season, but they're still not a team that's going to defend that very well. So just kind of a tough break on a couple of fronts for A&M there. Mark brings up a good point here. A&M's at UGA to finish, not looking good for them to make the tournament. I mean, I still think they're in, if they win the final 2 games of the Mizzou series, which, as I said at the top of the show, is not the not the gimme that I think we thought it was going to be. But if they do that, feels like they really only probably need to get one in that Georgia series on the road, which in any scenario, that's what we're expecting of road teams in the SEC, is just don't get swept. The other tricky part here, though, and I don't think this is going to come into play necessarily, but their RPI as of this morning, right this minute, is down to 46. And it's pretty rare that SEC bubble teams have RPI problems. Now, we saw it last year with State, but that was in regard to hosting, not in regard to making the field. So it is pretty rare. Mizzou has had years like that. There was a year early in Steve Beezer's tenure, I believe, where they were maybe 15-15 in the league, or maybe it was 14-17 or 14-16. I forget what the exact record was, but their RPI was a little too high. And so A&M's now got that to worry about. Home games against Mizzou are not really going to help that RPI. Let me see where Missouri is here. 148, which is not a killer. Like, it's not like 200 plus like some of your non-conference games, but still, that might be close to a record low RPI for SEC teams, at least in this, like the last 5 to 7 years. So anyway, I say all that to say, like, if you made me pick today, I'm still going to say they're going to find a way to get in. However, they now are fighting kind of a two-front battle where, you've got to get the SEC conference wins, but also you've got to kind of watch the RPI. Now, playing Georgia on the road next weekend, I think, should fix the RPI stuff, because just playing those series against a team that has kind of been bouncing around 1 or 2 in the RPI for the last few weeks, they're back up to number 1 today. I just checking just now. So that'll fix a lot of the RPI stuff, but you got to get the wins too. All right, let's see here. If Florida gets to 15-15, which could happen, 1 more from Texas and 2 from Bama, couple that with a top 15 RPI and strength of schedule, could they host? Would be series wins over Texas, Arkansas, FSU, Bama, Miami, Mississippi State. Yeah, suddenly the Miami series win starts to really take on some value in the Gators resume, which is something like 6 weeks ago I thought was not going to be the case. Yeah, they could, but I will say teams that are 15-15 in the SEC or the ACC, because it has happened in that league as well, that have hosted tend to be teams that made a good run in the conference tournament. So unless the committee does something we've never seen them do before, which is just a 15-15 regular season without a deep run in a tournament, that team getting to host, that would be new. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen. Like, stuff breaks precedent all the time, but there is a precedent here. And so I guess I would imagine they would have to do a little something in Hoover. But again, like, we are in a new era of SEC baseball. The league is tougher than it's ever been. It's deeper than it's ever been, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that precedent could be broken. But I would generally say, to feel good about it, get to 15, win some games in Hoover, and then come up for air and see where you are. Nicholas Doherty says, does the LSU lineup have enough to go far? We know the top 3 or 4 are dangerous, but after that, I mean, yeah, this has been a concern for me for a while now. And I think the folks who are more on the pro LSU lineup side keep thinking that something will change, or that maybe I'm not looking at, but they have some good individual players. But when you think about the fact that Jared Jones has been hitting about 250 in conference and the 4 home runs in conference, the power really hasn't been there. Reminds me a little bit of Blake Burke's season 2 years ago, not last year when he was one of the best players in the country, but the year prior, where his overall numbers looked pretty good. But then when you flipped over to conference, he was hitting something like, I forget what the average was, but he only had a couple home runs in conference. And that kind of feels like what Jared Jones' season is. You look at the numbers overall and you're like, man, great year. And he has had a very good year. There's a lot of college baseball players that would love to have that year. But then you look at the conference stats, and it's been a lot tougher go of it for him. And you combine that with Stephen Milam hitting around 200 in conference, and that's been offset a little bit by the fact that Chris Stanfield has gotten hot and really has helped lead them in conference. But, it's Jared Jones still is such a threat that you have to consider him a centerpiece of it. But it's Jones and it's Stanfield and Curiel and Danny Dickinson and maybe Josh Pearson, guys like that. But there's just not this lineup is just not as scary as it's been. Some of it, I think, is the offensive environment, because I do think if the ball was carrying the way it has the last couple of years, there might be a scenario where a guy like Danny Dickinson is more like in the 13, 14 home run range right now instead of whatever he's on 8, I think. And maybe someone else would fit into that category. But the offensive environment's just not as hitter friendly as it's been. And so I do think that's hurting the LSU lineup a little bit. So I am a little concerned about it. Now, what's offsetting that is that I think the Anderson-Ianson 1-2, at least in the SEC, is the best 1-2 punch out there. Now, FSU, if you look nationally, FSU might have a claim on that. There are probably other teams I'm not thinking of that could say something similar, but for me, that's the top 1-2 punch in the country. They both ranked in the top 10 in our starting pitcher rankings we put out this past week. So I think that offsets that. But your question is valid because it just doesn't feel like it's a dangerous lineup past a handful of guys. Sean says, I don't think one at Foley gets it done. They need at least 2 now. They dropped 9 spots in the RPI last night, and even winning the next 2 probably doesn't improve their RPI. Yeah, you're right, John. That's kind of what we were just talking about. I hadn't seen your comment at that point, but yeah, again, they're fighting a 2-front war, and that's in the SEC. Typically, you're just fighting from a bubble standpoint on one front, and that's getting the number of SEC wins it takes because the RPI tends to take care of itself. So this is a little bit different. James Gillum asks a serious question, and this comes from a Carolina fan season ticket holder. Is the catcher position at Carolina the worst position group of any school ever? There isn't a catcher hitting over 200. I'm not enough of a historian to tell you, James, and I know you kind of you asked that. The specifics of the question are kind of facetious, but your general question is valid, and that's that it's been a big problem. And we knew this coming into the season, right? I mean, the best case scenario was Talmadge Lecroy staying healthy and being the everyday catcher. And, he is Talmadge Lecroy is a nice player. Like he's had a nice career at South Carolina. He's, clearly like a leader on that team, but he's not a natural. Well, he arrived at South Carolina as a catcher, but hadn't done a ton of it. So he's has not really caught in a long time. In the fall, I was there for one of the fall scrimmages, and reports from everyone else who'd been around all fall said like that stopping base stealing had been a real problem. And then even in the depth, once he goes down, the depth is just not there. You've got Max Coffer and Gavin Brayland, and neither of those guys are really threats with the bat, and neither also have just done a ton of catching. Coffer did some at A&M when A&M had its own depth issues at catcher. So yeah, it's been a serious concern, and it has been for day one. Ultimately, that's only one of a lot of problems that South Carolina has run into, obviously, but it kind of was one of the original sins, if you will, for the South Carolina team that foretold a little bit what this season was going to be like. Mark says Gackle has not been what Arkansas expected this year. I will say, though, since moving to the bullpen, it's been a different guy. Now, last night, the outing wasn't perfect. I'm flipping over to the box. Yeah, I mean, he gave up a run last night and got the loss, but because he was on the mound for the walk-off sac fly. But he was largely pretty solid, and his previous 2 bullpen outings have been great. So I think we're seeing a different pitcher now. But I will agree with you, Mark, from the standpoint of I think we all assumed, I certainly did, that they were just going to stick Gabe Gackle in the rotation and he was just going to take off and be one of the best 5 to 10 starting pitchers in the country. And that didn't happen. So from that standpoint, yes. But now that he's back in the bullpen, I do think he has kind of found himself a little bit again. Delays are incredibly tough. Just look at Joe's performance last Sunday when he slept until noon. Yeah, that was a tough one. If you didn't hear the story so you may remember last Sunday, my Weekend Waypoints episode was late. So here was the deal. So I woke up on time to do this show. My power was out. And so I'm like, well, power's out, can't do the show because, frankly, my laptop needed a charge on top of that, but internet's out, what have you. So I'll just kind of hang around. We'll wait and see what time the power comes back on. Fell back asleep after being awake for, just a little bit. And then didn't wake up till almost noon, which I hadn't had a day like that since I was in my 20s, where I just woke up and was like, what on earth just happened? I don't know. Maybe we can blame it on allergy stuff. The pollen here in North Carolina has been awful. I was coming back from being on the West Coast. Maybe we can blame it on that, on body clock stuff. Or maybe I was just having a lazy day. I don't know. But I appreciate Sean for always keeping me humble in the comments. Regardless, it was a weird day. Vandy Chris 24 says, have you talked about Tennessee Vandy yet? I have not, so thank you for bringing it up because that was a good game as well. JD wasn't his best, but he really battled for Vandy, and the doors didn't fold late and gave themselves a chance at the end. Good game, hate the result. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a totally fair assessment of it. JD Thompson was right there with Liam Doyle. Liam Doyle pitched great. Vanderbilt got to the bullpen, but JD Thompson set the tone there and gave his team a chance to win. And winning yesterday, I feel like almost would have been house money for Vanderbilt, because the pattern for Tennessee has been, they play great with Liam Doyle on the mound, and then the next 2 days get dicey. If Vanderbilt had found a way yesterday to win that game, I think then you get greedy if you're Vanderbilt and say, like, we're expecting to win this series now. Let's try to go sweep this thing on the road. Now, I still wouldn't have predicted that, but that would have been in play. Now, of course, that didn't happen. Tennessee got the win. Liam Doyle was great. But yeah, I was impressed by Vanderbilt. I had that game as I was in the ECU press box, we had a little bit of a rain delay, and I was able to pull up that game and watch the last few innings of it. So saw some of that. But yeah, I was impressed. I think the next 2 days are going to be a real rock fight between those two teams. Because Tennessee, I think there's a little bit of desperation there with Tennessee realizing, okay, there's some urgency here now. Like, we got to get moving. And I think Vanderbilt's finding itself. I still think it's still a flawed team. Let's be honest, but they're playing with like a confidence and a kind of a swagger, honestly, that we haven't always seen from them the last couple of seasons. So intrigued to see the next couple of games. Pardon me. Sorry, I'm scrolling to read questions here. Jeremy Scott says Riley Quick looked good in the innings he pitched until the rain came. Yeah, I mean, that's so good news on that front, because I do think Riley Quick, him turning in, just being consistent, turning in good outings stacked on top of each other is a huge key for Alabama generally. So there is the positive in that. But yeah, certainly you don't want, interrupted by rain and have routines interrupted and things like that. And, this resumption for Bama is important because, I mean, they got Georgia, 19-3 in the first game for Georgia over Alabama, 7-inning game. So Bama evening up that series with the resumption of the game today is going to be important just to stay kind of on track and give Alabama a chance to defend its home field and win the series. Vandy Chris says, top 8 question. If it comes down to Vandy and Auburn at 8, does it go to Auburn for winning the series or to Vandy for the high RPI and strength of schedule with top 25 wins? I suspect Auburn is they have a high RPI too. Well, yeah, the RPI is probably going to be a wash just because they're in this right now. It's Auburn 3 and Vanderbilt 5. Vanderbilt fell a couple of spots with the loss yesterday, or just with other teams moving around. Sometimes it's not even about how much the team moved and more about how much others around you moved. But regardless, so I think you're onto something that is going to be an interesting debate. I don't think I mentioned this earlier in reference to Auburn LSU. Like the head-to-head matters, but I just don't think the committee looks at that as any different. It looks at it more as like, if you win 2 out of 3, it's 2 quality wins, not a series win against this other team we're comparing you to. I do think if it really gets down to nuts and bolts, that can be a tiebreaker. However, I do think they're going to look at RPI first, strength of schedule, top 25, all the stuff you name, strength schedule, top 25 wins, wins versus quads 1 and 2. Did you intend to schedule, like your scheduling intent? All of that stuff will be rolled into. So the head-to-head will be a factor, maybe. But I don't think it's going to be a decided. Like, I don't think they just look at it and say, okay, if we're comparing these two teams, we're just automatically going to go with the one that won the head-to-head matchup. Like, I don't think that's the way it would go. Vandy Chris also says, I don't think Texas A&M gets in with 12 and 18. No team ever has. I agree. There was a 12 and 17. That was Alabama in 2019. Their RPI was really good, something like 27 26 or 28, something like that. And 50% of teams that have gotten to 13 and 17 have been left out. So yes, you are technically correct, Chris, in that about 50% of the teams that have gotten to 13 and 17 have been left out. But I don't think some of those teams, if you go back to like 2000, even as recent as like 2018, 19, I don't think that's relevant to today, because I do think that the SEC is being evaluated differently than it was then. For better, for fair or not. Other conferences might think that's unfair, but the SEC is being evaluated differently today. And you look at last year, where all 4 of the teams sitting on 13 and 17 got in. And look, I mean, LSU got to the SEC tournament final. So some of those teams helped themselves with their runs in Hoover, but some didn't, and they got in. So I think that's a different SEC. I think 13 is a lot more certain now than it was even like I said, like 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I could be wrong, right? I mean, every committee is different, and this committee could draw a hard line on, we're not taking 13 and 17. We're not taking borderline power conference teams. I don't anticipate that, but they could make that decision, and we don't know, because they're humans. They're not computers, so we don't know what they're going to do. But I would just say that the data on what percentage of 13 and 17 teams get in, I would say I would be more interested in like squishing that data down to maybe the last like 3 or 4 years versus history, because I do think the history of, more than a handful of years ago is probably not relevant in the discussion this year. Judge Smales says, did we see a preview of CWS final with LSU and Arkansas? Certainly could be. Those are 2 teams I would put in Omaha if you maybe make a list today. But some of it just depends on what sides of the bracket they end up on, right? Because they might be in the same side of the bracket in Omaha. But it could be, very well could be. And look, I'd sign up for that today in terms of quality, in terms of fan interest. They would pack the place in Omaha. In terms of team quality, in terms of history, there'd be history on the line. Arkansas trying to break through with the first national title. There's a ton of fun storylines. So I'd take that if you gave me that today, just in terms of sheer entertainment value. That would be a good final. All right, let's do hitter and pitcher of the day real quick. Great questions today, as always. Let's get through hitter and pitcher real quick, and then we'll let you guys get on with your Saturday. Beautiful day here in the Carolinas as I look out the window. I guess not the same for a lot of you guys, because we're still talking a lot about weather here. Hitter, there we go. All right. Hitter of the day is Eric Guevara of Auburn. They played 2 yesterday against South Carolina, swept it. So Auburn sweeps that series against Carolina. One game got dicey there. Game 1 of the doubleheader was shockingly close, but the other 2 games were not. But Eric Guevara, 4 for 5 in both games, so 8 for 10 yesterday. Had a big game on Thursday as well. So I guess congratulations to Eric Guevara on being SEC Player of the Week, because it's hard to imagine somebody doing better than that. A couple doubles, a home run, a walk, three runs batted in game 1. Also drove in a run in game 2. Huge game for him there. Chris Rimbert also was great in both games. 5 total hits between the 2 games. On the South Carolina side, Henry Kazmar in game 1 was 3 for 5. Jace Boyda 3 for 5. Bo Hollins 4 for 5. KJ Scobie 3 for 4 with a clutch home run. And on the Auburn side in game 2, Lucas Steele 4 for 4 with a double and a home run. So a lot of offense in that doubleheader. Then we go back to the top. Missouri, a couple big games. Jackson Lovich was huge for them. Keegan Knutson reached base 4 times, stole a base. On the A&M side, Jace Laviolette with 2 home runs. Wyatt Hensler 2 hits, including a home run, and then he took a walk. Scrolling down a little further, Trey Phelps 3 for 5 for Georgia. Colby Branch 3 for 5, 2 home runs, 5 runs batted in. For Arkansas, Justin Thomas Jr. 3 for 4. Ethan Fry 2 for 4. Double, a home run, got that walk-off sac fly. Also got tagged out trying to score. That was the play where Zach Root came off the mound and tagged him as he was trying to score. Ethan Fry got tagged in a location that is indelicate. We will put it that way. It was just kind of a funny still shot. You can find it online. Hayden Yost of Florida 3 for 4 with a double and a walk. But the hitter of the day, really no doubt about it, Eric Guevara. Hard to have a better day than he had in that doubleheader against South Carolina. And sure, it is just South Carolina, but my goodness, like just a a fantastic day at the plate. 8 for 10 in 2 games against anybody is going to be impressive. All right, let's do pitchers real quick. I forgot to highlight it here, but Evan Cieri, pitcher of the day, with that 15 performance for Mississippi State. No walks either. That's the other thing too. Is didn't walk a single soul. Best outing of his career in a Mississippi State uniform. Other candidates, his opposite number there was Riley Maddox for Ole Miss, 6 1/3 strong innings. That's the second time in 3 weeks that Riley Maddox has thrown the ball like that, and that's huge for Ole Miss, especially if they starting to look toward the postseason. Other performances: Caden Jacoby, Brock Lucas, and Xavier Lovett out of Missouri bullpen. They really were the kind of collective MVPs of that win for Missouri, holding A&M scoreless over the final 6 2/3. Ryan Prager was solid. As Sean mentioned, kind of got victimized by, infield hits and what have you, but a strong performance there. For South Carolina in game 1 of the doubleheader, Ashton Crowther, and he's been a real pleasant surprise for South Carolina. Not a guy who was really in the mix at all early in the season, a guy they've gone to here lately more often and has done a lot of nice things for them. In game 2 of the doubleheader for Auburn, Griffin Graves, Dylan Watts, strong relief performance. Hunter Elliott for Ole Miss, strong start in game 1 of that doubleheader. Liam Doyle, on a lot of days, that would have been the pitcher of the day with 7 shutout innings, 12 strikeouts, but Evan Cieri was just that much better. J.D. Thompson opposite him, great pitcher's duel in that game. Jackson Novy and Simon Gregerson for Kentucky. Great relief work there. We haven't talked about that game, actually, but huge win for Kentucky, 4-3 over Oklahoma. Gets Kentucky one step closer to getting to the postseason, now sitting 11-14 in the SEC. Got 11-14, got one step closer to being to being in the postseason. Obviously, still need to win this series, and then they're going to have to steal a game on the road. That's kind of the path, if you will, to at least get to 13, and we'll see if that ends up being good enough if they get there. Zach Root for Arkansas, Zach Cowan in relief for LSU. Zach Cowan's work, especially to get out of a bases loaded jam there late in the game, was huge to give LSU time to end up walking it off. And Billy Barlow for Florida, they beat Texas 8-2. They were all over Ruger Riojas. I think it was 6 runs in the first inning for Florida. Riojas just wasn't fooling anyone at all in any sense. So that was that was shocking. But Barlow did a nice job kind of holding. It was an opener start for Pierce Coppola. Barlow came in after him through 4 strong innings to make sure the game kind of stayed where it was, didn't let Texas get any ideas of mounting a comeback. So a huge relief outing there for Barlow to get that done for the Gators. But pitcher of the day, of course, Evan Cieri. All right. Some comments here. Mark says Doyle had 3 less hits, but 3 less Ks. Doyle pitched better. But I mean, you could make that argument. I disagree, but you could make that argument, certainly. Frank Schaefer says, on the Florida host discussion, remember, nobody has ever started 1-11 in conference and won 15 conference games in the SEC. Yeah, I mean, that is important context. Now, I don't think the committee takes that into consideration necessarily, that, wow, how impressive is it this team was 1-11. They'll acknowledge that, but that's not necessarily a bullet point for Florida. It is a bullet point for just what they've done being super impressive and unprecedented largely, but I don't think the committee is going to look at that necessarily as a point in their favor when comparing other teams. Max says Cade Anderson was good too against the best lineup in the country. Yeah, I could have put him on this list for sure. I just end up having to draw the line somewhere every week, but yeah, he was really, really solid. Again, both those guys just dealing with the quality of the opponent and also just having to take the mound at 10 p.m. and be on your game is tough. So, all right, game of the day I'm looking for today, Arkansas at LSU, Gage Wood versus Anthony Ianson. One little note here, Arkansas used Gabe Yackel already. Now, that doesn't mean they won't use him again necessarily, but the last 2 weeks they had piggybacked him with Gage Wood. That's probably not going to be available to them today as an option. So it'll be interesting to see once Arkansas goes to the bullpen, how they piece that together, given that Yackel is not going to be available in that typical role. All right, folks, almost 40 minutes today, and that feels fitting because we're getting close to the postseason. So that's all exciting stuff. I appreciate your questions appreciate the interaction. I appreciate the conversations y'all have between yourselves in the comments. I love that too. So keep them coming tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow morning to recap Saturday, look ahead to Sunday, and I will talk to y'all then. Enjoy the baseball, everybody.